Hello and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals. I'm your host, Eric Mahan, and I'm here to chat with you guys today about some environmental news stories and, of course, some animals. So, if this is your first time hanging out with me, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back and thanks for listening. Now, let's get started with some environmental news. Our first article is reported by BBC News, and it's called The Man Rescuing Britain's Magical Glowworms. And the article reads, "The fascination of glowworms for me is that they are in effect magic," says ecologist Pete Cooper as he tramples through thistles and nettles. The glowworm has been the symbol of the other world, of love, of hope, of rebirth, of simply the greatest mysteries of nature. The insect is declining in many parts of the UK due to a host of factors, from habitat loss to light pollution. Experts believe artificial lighting is distracting the males so they miss out on a chance to mate. The young conservationist has a passion for glowworms that's second to none. He has gone to extreme lengths to breed and release them in the south of England, such as here in Hampshire. He stops by a pile of rotting logs and opens the Tupperware tub he's clutching to his chest. Inside, not the takeaway it once contained, but a scattering of dirt. Peering closely, I spy a tiny centipede like insect waving a limb, one of Pete's precious cargo of baby glowworms. These larvae were hatched this summer, so they are very young, and they are only about the size of a grain of rice, says the protege of reintroduction pioneer Derek Go, known for his work with beavers, white storks, and water voles. "I'm not holding the twinkling box of lights," he added, referring to the eerie greenish orange glow made by the female of the species, the stuff of fairy tales and folklore. In fact, glowworms aren't worms at all, but beetles. The males are fully winged as adults and can fly, while the females are wingless and have to glow frantically in the summer months to attract a passing mate. The male comes in because it's attracted to the sight of the glow and it goes, "Wow, shiny," says Pete, who is passionate about nature. He's been a zoologist since I could walk, and his first words were trees, bracken, and grass. After studying zoology, he worked as a professional ecologist for 7 years, turning to breeding glowworms in his Bristol flat during the first lockdown in 2020. While many of us were baking banana bread, Pete took it up the impossible challenge. It was quite a cathartic moment of hope in this horrible COVID year of collecting these lights in the dark, he explains. But poetry aside, when he started, actually, it wasn't very poetic. It was a bit of a disaster. At first, he lost a lot of animals. He turned to citizen scientists for help, including a hobbyist who had bred 21 generations of glowworms over 14 years at his home in Germany. He soon perfected and scaled up his techniques and had begun releasing glowworms at various sites. I've joined him on grounds of historic hotels near Fleet, where he's helping to create a refuge for the insects in wild areas at the edge of manicured green lawns. More than 1,000 glowworm larvae have been released over 2 years in the living laboratory, and this summer he had the first encouraging signs with the discovery of one glowing female. "It's a long way to go before I could describe this release project as being successful," Pete explains, "but that's the thing about conservation. It's a long game." Newly hatched glowworms need naturally grassy habitats with plenty of snails to dine upon. In a scenario out of a horror movie, the young insects crawl into the animal shell and inject a paralyzing toxin that slowly turns the snail's inside into soup, which they are then sucked dry. This horror aside, not everyone's chuffed with the idea of introducing glowworms and many other animals into the wild. This week, the government said the likes of beavers and storks being released was a low priority to herald of criticism by wildlife groups. Alistair Driver, director of Rewilding Britain, says his attitude as short-sighted over the phone from his sanctuary in North Yorkshire, where he's advising on a project to bring wildlife back into the landscape. He says there are clearly international guidelines set by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. What we're doing wrong in this country is being ridiculously over bureaucratic about perfectly sensible, logical introductions following these guidelines, he says. Successful governments have been burying their heads in the sand on this, basically listening to a small minority who don't want to see the reintroduction of things like pine martens and beaver. Pete too has faced opposition for his glowworm project, but he points out that even the reintroduction of the red kite was once seen as controversial. And he forms over so-called rogue reintroductions with rare or extinct butterflies appear in random places by cover of night with the light with little chances of survival. I think it's very important we do these things well and with the best knowledge possible. But you've also got to be bold and pragmatic, he says. His work has garnered interest from other organizations seeking to do large scale glowworm releasing, including Wildwood in Devon and the Manchester Museum. They are now developing their own glowworm zoo based on his breeding techniques using a local population. Once upon a time, there were children that would go into the fields behind their houses, or they'd be exploring down by the rivers or in woodlands, and they would come across these fascinating little creatures, says Charlie Med, education and the conservation manager at Wildwood, Devon. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often now. We do a lot for education here at Wildwood, and most of the children wouldn't know what a glowworm was, so hopefully we can help improve those populations. Back in Hampshire, it's time to say goodbye to these little critters. Pete parts the grass, then gently tips his charges onto the ground. Those glowworms are now officially wild animals, he announces, solemnly snapping the lid back on his box. He hopes his work can be a symbol of hope in a time of biodiversity loss. This one little glowworm, this little light in the dark, can help be the catalyst for a much bigger change for nature, he says. Whew. Long article, but what a great one. And it's about such a little creature and an amazing guy trying to save them. As they pointed out, I guess over there they were making a lot of banana bread. I know over here in the States it was all about sourdough and sour bread and all that sort of stuff. So great to see that something good came during the lockdown. And it's really cool to see, too, that after all, sometimes it's not always saving these large creatures. Sometimes it's about saving some of the smallest creatures of the world that can make the biggest impact. Next up, since our last article was so long and our next one isn't a short one either, we're only going to be doing 2 environmental news stories. So for our final article for environmental news, how wild elephants solve puzzles may help humans resolve wildlife conflicts. And this is reported by MangaBee, and it reads, opening doors may not seem that hard, but when you have a trunk instead of hands, things can get complicated. Researchers test the problem-solving skills of wild elephants for the first time by tasking the jumbos with doing just that. Elephants are brainy. An adult elephant's brain can weigh about 5 kilograms or 11 pounds, the largest of any terrestrial animal, and 3 times the size of the human brain. From living in complex social groups, mourning their dead, to finding elusive water sources, pachyderms display a range of intelligent behaviors. In other species that have been tested for innovation, bigger brains have been correlated with more innovation, said Sarah Jacobson at the City University of New York's Comparative Cognition for Conservation Lab. We wanted to come up with a way to measure this in wild elephants, to find out if more gray matter actually translate to better problem-solving skills. Jacobson and her team designed an experiment engaging Asian elephants at Thailand's Salakpra Wildlife Sanctuary in an open-air puzzle. They came up with a contraption with 3 small compartments that had doors that opened in 3 different ways: push, pull, and slide. Inside each nook lay a morsel of juicy jackfruit, a favorite snack. 5 of the 44 elephants that engaged with the box managed to open up all 3 doors. 8 managed to open up 2, and another 11 just 1. The number of doors they opened captured their ability to innovate under the experiment, with their findings recently published in the Journal of Animal Behavior. The 5 who scored all doors were older males. It wasn't clear from the data what role gender played with this success. What the results did show was that the persistence paid off. The more time an elephant spent interacting with the puzzle, the higher its chances of success. Trying different actions also yielded rewards. The team first piloted the experiment at a zoo in the US where more than 60% of the jumbo participants opened all 3 doors, 8 out of 14. Jacobson's attributed their better performance to their environment and experience. All of their food and needs are taken care of, she said, adding that captive elephants have fewer distractions compared to wild cousins. Zoo-housed elephants are also exposed to a more interactive environment. Zookeepers like to do things interesting for their wards, which is helpful when facing another human-conceited challenge. It is important to study the cognitive of elephants, given how intelligent and endangered they are, said Lisa P. Barrett, an expert in animal cognition at Indian University, Bloomington, who was now involved with the study. We may learn how to help conserve Asian elephants, for example, by better understanding how they approach and solve a novel puzzle. Jacobson said that with growing pressure on elephant habitats, jumbos faced a changing environment and novel challenges. However, the cleverness of elephants can be tricky for people who share space with them. For one thing, smart elephants will find ways around the barriers that communities put up to protect life, livestock, and property. In Kenya's Liwa Wildlife Conservancy, for instance, electric fences have been able to deter tuskers. Elephants there quickly learned that their tusks didn't conduct electricity. Soon they started using them to manipulate and break through the barriers. In one video uploaded by researchers at Liwa, an African elephant can be seen holding the wires up with his tusk, allowing others to pass beneath. Such ingenious displays may make for compelling viewing on social media, but on the ground it can be a sign of trouble to come. Jacobson's advisory at CUNY recommended Selacra Wildlife Sanctuary for her study. Because of the intensity of human-elephant conflicts there, people living around the sanctuary have tried everything from firecrackers to electric barriers to beehives to keep elephants out. The current study focused on elephants living deep within the reserve. We are planning to test this on elephants living on the edges of the sanctuary, Jacobson said, which might tell researchers more about herds and individual members that are more likely to come into contact with neighboring communities. When trying to soothe conflicts between the two species, humans and elephants, paying attention to the latter helps. That means studying all aspects of elephant intelligence, how they perceive and navigate the world. It may be possible to eventually create profiles of individual elephants. These may be useful in cases where some particularly feisty and artful individuals cause a lot of damage. It can allow people to come up with better ways to prevent harm from their wild neighbors at large. For example, if the concerned elephant is timid, loud noises may be enough to repel it rather than expensive fencing. While this appears to punish the more enterprising elephants, reducing dangerous interactions can in fact promote their welfare. Jacobson and colleagues showed that there is an individual variant in problem-solving ability of wild elephants, Barrett said. If we know something about problem individuals who are learning and spreading problematic behaviors such as crop raiding, we may be able to design targeted intervention efforts that mitigate human-elephant conflict. And that's the article. Okay. I gotta say, what a fascinating approach this article talks about. I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you hear it out loud. To understand elephants is how they look at the world, and to solve puzzles is a great way to figure out how people can start to save hundreds of elephants from these misunderstandings between them and humans. After all, if we can better communicate or better understand how to live with creatures like elephants, both groups can actually start to thrive together. And that is your environmental news. So for today's creature feature, I'm going to be talking about a frog that is actually extremely common, and I have literally seen thousands of them. But that doesn't make them any less amazing, especially with almost their super-like ability they possess. And this superpowered frog is none other than the amazing wood frog. Now, the wood frog is found in parts of Alaska, Canada, and much of the Northeast United States, and some smaller pockets that extend a little further, a little south and west. But this amphibian is considered one of the most northern amphibians found in North America and is definitely a cold weather loving creature. The wood frog is found in deciduous, conifers, and mixed forests, marshes, meadows, and swamps. The wood frog spends most of its time on the ground in woody forests. Now, the wood frog itself can reach a size of about 1.5 to about 3.25 inches or 3.8 to about 8.2 centimeters in length, normally with females being slightly larger than the males. Also, the wood frog can normally weigh about 8 grams or about 0.3 ounces and have a lifespan that is normally around 3 years. Now, onto its good looks. Now, these frogs exhibit a number of different skin colors, usually browns, tans, and rusts, but they can also be found in shades of green and gray. They can be distinguished by a black robber's mask that extends over their outer ear to the base of their front legs. They also feature a white line outlining their upper lips. Most wood frogs have a light yellowish brown fold around their sides and mid-back. They have two black ridges on either side that extend from behind their eye down to the side of their back and to their legs. Their underparts are normally white to becoming pale orange yellow towards the rear, with male frogs having more bright colors on their thighs. Now, these colors are extremely helpful for camouflage, helping them blend into their forest floor, especially since they are known to be fairly active during the day. Mostly. Now, the camouflage helps with both finding food and not becoming food. For what they eat, well, they eat a wide range of land invertebrates as adults. They'll eat spiders, beetles, flies, slugs, snails, worms, and many more. How they do this is they will use their huge mouth and quick tongue to help gobble up these little snacks before they even know what happens. This is thanks to, well, their great camouflage, their great eyesight, and a very quick tongue. As for what may eat them, it sort of depends on their life cycle. After all, wood frogs do have a tadpole stage where they are a little aquatic larva that does not look anything like their parents. Adult wood frogs have many predators, including larger frogs, garter snakes, ribbon snakes, water snakes, herons, raccoons, skunk, and mink, just to name a few. Tadpoles, however, are preyed upon by diving beetles, water bugs, salamander larvae, leeches, easter newts, aquatic insects also can eat these wood frogs, and even their eggs. Wood frogs have developed several anti-predator mechanisms, however. Older tadpoles develop poison glands that repel many predators. Adult wood frogs have noxious skin secretions, but they are only effective in deterring shrews most of the time. A lot of others will still go after them. But along with their camouflage, all of this kind of does cut back on the number of frogs that, well, become snacks. Now, if an adult does get caught, they will also have one last Hail Mary, which is they will produce an ear-piercing scream that can sometimes confuse and freak out a potential predator. But if not, then they're snacks for the predator. That's not the only thing these frogs have to worry about. After all, they are found very far north, and it's a very cold place to be for a frog. After all, frogs rely on water to survive, and the north is a tough place for them to kind of work that out because parts of the year it's completely dark, and every single drop of water found in those regions is frozen solid. But wood frogs have a unique trick up their sleeve, which gives them the ability to be the most northern amphibian in North America. And that is all about how they can deal with winter. And that is, they can freeze almost completely solid and pretty much then come back from the dead. And scientists are not fully aware yet how it can be done. But once they do figure it out, this could be what leads to cryofreezing, like you see in the movies that goes on space travel, and so on. But wood frogs are able to do it. And wood frogs do it where they are able to have half their body frozen completely solid. In the wild, they will normally find a nice burrow when it starts getting cold out. They will find a nice, safe spot because this is a very vulnerable time for them. When it starts getting this cold, they kind of start to slow down. Once they do find that spot and settle in, and it starts getting cold enough, ice crystals will form all over the frog's skin, and its heartbeat and lung functions will almost completely stop when it reaches the colder temperatures of winter. And then these frogs will seem frozen solid and dead for all purposes. After all, they have these ice formed all around them, and even their eyes turn white since they are frozen solid. But then somehow, when the warmth of spring begins, they will slowly thaw out and reanimate the wood frogs from their icy slumber of hibernation that can last up to 8 months. What we do know what happens internally is that the wood frog liver produces large amounts of glucose that flushes into every cell in its body. This syrupy sugar solution prevents the cells from freezing and binds the water molecules inside the cells to prevent dehydration. So, on one hand, the wood frog's body allows ice to form from outside of the cells and organs, but on the other hand, it prevents ice from forming inside the cells themselves, thus avoiding the lethal damage suffered by most animals when they freeze. And in the springtime, wood frogs thaw from the inside outward. First, their heart starts beating, then their brain activates. Finally, their legs start to move. Now, this is the part that many scientists don't fully understand yet, and that is What actually seems to start the wood frog's heart after being frozen and inert for the entire northern winter? The wood frog comes out completely undamaged by these conditions that would be fatal to nearly all other animals. And after being frozen for so long, they only have one thing in mind: breeding. After all, they don't really have that much time to breed. They must eat and get ready to be frozen again. After all, up north, all these animals kind of think like Ned Stark. Winter is always coming. Spring is the best time for these animals to breed. For one, it's the longest period of time till winter begins, giving their young the most time to prepare before the great freeze comes. This also gives the adults enough time to recover from breeding and to bulk up for the winter. And finally, spring is normally very wet, and these frogs need water to breed. Wood frogs are some of the first frogs to start breeding in the spring. Their mating season starts with the first warm spring rains and runs from March through May. Outside of breeding season, they are normally solitary animals, and yet once those rains start, it's an invitation for all the wood frogs around that it's time to party. Wood frogs from all different places normally come to one central point called a vernal pool to breed. Millions of frogs will come to these pools under the cover of darkness, being one of the largest migrations in the world that many people don't even know exist. The vernal pools are small, shallow forest ponds fed by melting snow, rain, or groundwater, but normally do dry up at certain times of the year. Many amphibians use them, but it's normally the wood frog that gets there first. Vernal pools are a great place for amphibians to lay eggs because they don't support any fish that might eat them. After mating, females will lay egg masses made up of 1,000 to 3,000 eggs in these vernal pools. The egg masses will flatten and float to the surface, camouflaged by this green jelly surrounding the eggs. Male frogs, however, are the first normally to come to these pools in the middle of the night, under the cover of darkness. They will then use their two air sacs to call out to attract females to enter these pools. Males will fight over the best spots, pushing males out of the area, as well as trying to be in the more central part of these pools, which is normally the safer part since those are going to be the last places to dry up if the rains or the snow melt is not very strong that year. These pools can literally have thousands of frogs, and it can be quite loud with all of them calling at once, especially since sometimes multiple vernal pools can be found next to each other. When the females do then eventually show up, it's all about finding the strongest, best sounding male, normally in the best spots. But also when a female approaches, normally it's multiple males all trying to jump on top of her and amplex her, which is just a fancy term for males hopping on to these females with specialized front feet that is able to lock under her armpits and not let go. So it's just a fancy word for froggy style. The female will then find a comfortable spot and she will release her eggs. The male will start releasing his sperm, fertilizing the eggs outside the body and in the vernal pool itself. The females will leave and the males will see if he can get lucky again. But soon, all adults will leave the vernal pools. The eggs take between a week and a month to hatch, depending on the temperatures. Eggs laid early in the season when the weather is colder will take longer. The tadpoles will feed on algae along with decaying plant life and animals that may be found in these vernal pools. Also, I have seen millions of these tadpoles in the wild in these vernal pools, and it is a really cool thing to see. Little fun fact about the tadpoles is you can identify them from other tadpoles in the vernal pools because they normally have a copper coloring under their underside, which is a quick way to help you ID wood frog tadpoles from other tadpoles that you may be seeing hanging out in these pools. Now, the tadpoles begin metamorphosizing to adult frogs in about 2 months. Males reach sexual maturity at 1 to 2 years of age, while females may take 3 years. Females often live a little longer than the males. Now, as for the population status, I might have given it away at the beginning. As I said, I've literally seen thousands of these guys. But according to the IUCN Red List, wood frogs are considered least concern, population trend stable. But of course, we're still going to chat about possible threats, just as we always do, to make sure we're aware of anything that could happen in the future if we are not careful. First of course, global climate change. These are cold weather frogs. They could move further south if they were so designed to, but the fact that the earth is slowly changing and becoming warmer it actually creates less habitat for them, pushing them further and further north, being that they have a certain temperature requirement. Another, of course, is habitat loss, and that's really the biggest one, along with, of course, pollution, but it all sort of ties together. We humans obviously like to build things, and not too often do we put the time and energy to studying the area beforehand to see what sort of impact we may have in the cost of animals and their homes, and actually, in the end, possibly a cost to us financially. Let me explain. Besides just general habitats, vernal pools are drying and becoming destroyed due to habitat destruction from humans. Vernals are not always there, and many species of amphibians, including wood frogs, need these vernals to be able to create the next generation. So without these specialized pools, they just can't survive. And with less snowfall each year, droughts, and humans rerouting water for their own needs, many vernals are just not able to fill with enough water for long enough for these amphibians to breed. And in desperate times, they may try and lay in other water sources like creeks, ponds, lakes. But remember, these amphibians choose to use vernals for the safety. And a lot of fish would eat those eggs, and most of them won't survive. As for the part that can affect us, people will come, say, in July when it's nice and hot and dry to see a property without any ponds or waters on it. So they think it's okay to build there. They then end up building right on a vernal, not only destroying a major part of the environment, but building their building on a place known to collect tons of water depending on what time of year it is. Meaning, without knowing so, they could be building their house in what is to be considered a flood zone, even if there doesn't seem to be any signs of it, depending on, like I said, the time of year you're looking at it. Now, the same thing with pollution and trash, whatever. Not only can all this be littering across forest floors, but also creates zones when it rains and the snowmelt happens, becomes toxic water that then ends up in these vernal pools that animals will drink and, of course, try and breed in. So, what can we do? Well, we cover global climate change a bunch. So, reduce your carbon footprint, try to encourage greener practices, not just in your life, but others. But don't be a dick about it because people then normally don't want to do it. As for vernals, being destroyed and having construction sites surveys done by an independent third party are always good things to do, but a lot of them are already doing it. My thing is that it really should be a minimum of a year study, sometimes a couple, since not every year does a vernal fill. And knowing all of this can actually not only help people that are trying to build that, oh, wait, there's a vernal hill. Not a good place to put a building because it's going to flood, as well as knowing major hotspots to help out the wild population. Another solution, of course, is artificial vernal construction, but this is not really a good solution in that tons of studies have been done, and artificial versus wild vernals still hold a lot more possibilities, and not every single species seems okay with the artificial vernal option. And also, it adds the complication of that you don't really want to encourage builders to be, well, I really want my building here, and I don't care if a vernal's there. I'll just move a vernal, build something somewhere else for these frogs, because not every single amphibian is going to then, well, move to that artificial vernal. And honestly, yeah, it's more for something where an area has had loss of vernals there for years. So close to heavily populated areas that have been heavily populated for a while could benefit from artificial vernals because the loss of species have been there for so long that creating these vernals and this habitat would actually then hopefully bring these animals that have been gone for a while back to this area. And of course, when it comes to pollution, just don't be a dick and throw your trash away and other products away correctly, because you just dumping oil in your backyard, as little as it might seem, could cause huge devastation to wildlife, not just in your own backyard, but even miles away, because when it rains, it'll transport that stuff pretty much everywhere. And if we start doing all these things and just making sure there is still a place for healthy ecosystems, we should have the pleasure of seeing these frozen little popsicles of a frog for years to come. The amazing wood frog. And that's the show. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the wood frog. As always, make sure to check me out on my social media pages, Facebook X, aka Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and of course, if you need to reach out to me, you can reach me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com to chit and chat if you want. But I think that's it for me. Once again, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you all next time.